to action for sustainable growth as we navigate the dual challenges of economic recovery and climate resilience. This summit aims to spark innovative solutions, foster regional cooperation, and inspire transformative action for a greener and more inclusive South Asia. Let us embark on this journey, of this three-day journey, together with purpose, vision, and hope. Also, we're beginning right on time, so everyone outside the lobby area, the waiting area, we call upon all of you to kindly take your seats inside the Regency Ballroom. Gentlemen and ladies, while that is happening, we have the dignitaries arriving already. We welcome you on behalf of South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics, and Environment, SATI, and the entire family there. We also want all of us to put our hands together for our partners and co-organizers. Can just look for the people from these respective organizations, if not anything else. Also, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI Pakistan, and Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Gentlemen and ladies, let's put our hands together for the organizers and the co-organizers. Thank you. And I'll take this opportunity before I talk about the summit itself to also thank our partners. Asian Development Bank, gentlemen and ladies, Center for WTO Studies, United Nations, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and their sub-regional office for South and Southwest Asia, European Union, the Asia Foundation, Kathmandu University School of Management, the Commonwealth, and Oxfam. So that's another opportunity for us to put our hands together. Now the MC brief, I'm sure there's a lot of people, a lot of insiders who will shed more light on this event during the summit. But as the MC, I just want to share a brief on the summit itself. And also this is MC brief, so this can be very brief. So the themes that will take prominence during these 3 days encompass, if not more than this, the bare minimum that we will talk about things like transitioning to a green economy that aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and that require policy-focused strategies for industrial transformation and urbanization. Also, South Asia's challenges, such as being a developing region, South Asia faces vulnerabilities like poverty, climate-related disasters, and industrial challenges. So the must addresses are carbon border taxes, labels, and the rising risks of climate change to capitalize on opportunities. The region is highly susceptible to climate change impacts, with the Himalayan glaciers melting rapidly, increasing risks like floods and water insecurity. Economic losses from climate change in South Asia could even surpass global averages, and we are concerned as South Asians. The economic impacts, such as the predictions that show potential GDP reductions for countries like Nepal, Bhutan, India, and Pakistan by 2099. Climate change could cost South Asia $518 billion by 2050 and up to $997 billion by 2070, concerning. And the financial needs, finally, the theme that we would revolve around is that South Asia requires $1,758 billion by 2030 to implement climate plans with an annual requirement of $200 billion to address losses and damages under current warming levels. And with every MC Podge, I'd expect a round of applause, but not with this. I think we'd do more better by talking about them in these 3 days. Just habit. So I would now like to call upon the dignitaries up on stage. But before that, we have a very important theme to cover: the national anthem of Nepal. Ready? And we rise. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let me now call upon the dignitaries up on stage. Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, SATI, Nepal. Her Excellency Ms. Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassador of the European Union Delegation to Nepal. Her Excellency Ms. Hana Singer Hamdi, United Nations Resident Coordinator, Nepal. And the chief guest for this afternoon, Honorable Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal. Sir, ma'am. And Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chair Emeritus, SATI, Nepal. I request all the dignitaries to take your seats. Thank you. The oil lit lamps, they're panas, and so we do that with the chief guest, sir, the Honorable Minister, Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal. So, thank you, sir, thank you, ma'am. After that long just audio and the boring visual of the MC, we have this beautiful audio visual encapsulating the themes about the summit. So the audio visual. the team at SATI did put in a lot of work for this. So, who did this? I mean, you guys did this, right? So, thank you. Um, so for the speeches now, I'd like to call upon Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, for his welcoming remarks. So.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Posraj Pandey, Chair Emeritus, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, SATI, Chief Guest Honorable Damodar Bhandari, Minister, Minister of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, the Federal Republic of Nepal. Special guest, Honorable Sayyida Rizwana Hassan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, People's Republic of Bangladesh, who is joining us virtually. Her Excellency Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassadors of the European Union Delegation to Nepal. Her Excellency Hana Singhar Hamadi, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Nepal. Distinguished invitees, resource persons, participants, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored and privileged this afternoon to welcome all of you to the 15th edition of South Asia Economic Summit titled Unleashing an Equitable Green Transformation in South Asia. The summit was launched in 2008 by 5 think tanks in the region, namely Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh, Research and Information System for Developing Countries in India, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI in Pakistan, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, my own organization in Nepal, and Institute of Policy Studies in Sri Lanka. The objective of the initiative has been to provide a forum for dialogue to key stakeholders in the region, including government, private sector, civil society and development partners, to use regional cooperation as a springboard for economic prosperity. Allow me to first and foremost focus on the theme of the summit. Despite being home to 25% of humanity, South Asia has made negligible contributions to environmental degradation in general and global warming in particular. However, countries in the region face significant environmental challenges, as demonstrated by devastating floods in Pakistan, India, and Nepal in the recent past due to climate change, and dumping of toxic waste in South Asian shores. Moreover, South Asia has faced several droughts in recent decades, and 50 major droughts have been reported since 1990, affecting over 750 million people. These challenges notwithstanding, each country is uniquely positioned to tackle these issues as well as take advantage of opportunities to move towards green, equitable transformation. More importantly, some countries in the region have made remarkable progress. For example, a carbon-negative country, Bhutan, can access global markets where carbon emissions can become a trade barrier more competitively compared to many other countries in the world. Similarly, limited infrastructure for charging notwithstanding, Nepal, according to The Economist, has surpassed Norway to take the top spot as the country where it is cheapest to both own and operate electric vehicles. Likewise, as of September 2024, India is well on track towards its power capacity target, with non-fossil fuel electricity contributing nearly 44% of the total capacity. More importantly, it is poised to meet half of its energy requirement from clean energy by 2030 based on its latest nationally determined contribution. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has introduced a circular economy model to recycle and upcycle electronic waste. One such example is the launch of a re-commerce platform, a private sector initiative called Swap, that facilitates buying and selling of both new and previously used digital devices, which has been selling about 7,000 to 8,000 second-hand electronic devices each month. While these stories are worth underscoring as well as emulating, I'm sure all the partners of the South Asia Economic Summit and an overwhelming majority of resource persons and participants present here this afternoon would agree that fostering regional cooperation and collaboration could have a multiplier effect on green transformation. This is not least because there is a tremendous scope for sharing of knowledge, expertise, resources, and technology. Examples include Indian investment in renewable energy in Bhutan, and recently concluded energy trade agreement between Bangladesh and Nepal, with Nepal exporting 40 megawatt of electricity to the former, which can be scaled up later. Efforts are also afoot to deploy disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and Internet of Things to enhance agricultural productivity, enhance traceability, ensure equitable benefit sharing, and foster resilience. One such example is the establishment and operation of consortium for scaling up climate-smart agriculture in South Asia under the aegis of SAARC Agriculture Center based in Dhaka. At this summit, we intend to cover a large variety of issues ranging from technology to finance, encompassing almost all the sectors of the economy that are of critical significance to the region, such as agriculture, energy, industry, and services. It is hoped that the summit will help us to come up with a blueprint for regional cooperation, both in policies and practices, on equitable green transformation for the benefit of everyone in the region, following the Sustainable Development Goals principle of leaving no one behind. I think it's included in your speech also. While selecting resource persons, we have attempted to be as inclusive as possible in terms of country, in terms of expertise, in terms of constituencies, in terms of gender, and more importantly, in terms of generations. Therefore, you may see more young resource persons as well as participants in this summit than in the previous ones we had organized. This is to ensure that this group, representing almost half of the regional population, has a voice in shaping the future of green transformation in the region. With this, I would like to welcome you all once again and look forward to productive deliberations. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, SATI, Nepal. I'd like to now welcome the special guest, Honorable Ms. Saida Rizwana Hassan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Interim Government, People's Republic of Bangladesh, virtually. So, take people.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Minister of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Excellencies, colleagues and friends, very good afternoon from Bangladesh. It indeed is an honor for me to address you all today at this 15th South Asian Economic Summit. My sincere regrets for not being able to join you all in person, but I'm thankful to my friend Ratnakar Adhikari for making this opportunity for me to join you online at least. Nepal is my favorite country to go to, and anytime I get an invitation from Nepal, I never say no to it. But now things are a little different for me. So I had to be in Bangladesh because of my official responsibilities, but very happy to be with you all, even if it's not in person. See, it's a summit on economics, and I am not an economist by choice. I'm an environmental justice advocate by design, and I'm also a climate justice advocate. At least that is how I see myself. I was very actively engaged with SAUTI, the South Asian Watch on Trade, Environment and Economics. That was a platform which created scope for many of us from South Asia to come together and talk about both environmental justice and economic justice and link the two so that what we promote is not only development but sustainable development, a goal that must not be perceived as an idealistic dream only, but that has to be pursued with all sincerity for the sake of protecting the ecosystem, the Mother Earth, and most importantly, our future generations. As we pursue the vision of sustainable development, we are confronted with too many challenges. Most of the challenges are national problems that we create, national menaces that we have to deal with. But some of our challenges are also regional in nature and global in nature. Ratnakar has talked about the challenges of climate change, and neither Nepal nor Bangladesh really projects very well in the climate risk index. Bangladesh, in fact, is the 7th most vulnerable country, and Nepal, with the challenges of flood and glacier outbursts, is also ranked very high in the risk index. While that's an international issue, regionally also, we have both challenges and prospects. We have shared river systems within South Asia. We have not been able to talk about sustainable management or river basin-wide management of the river system. Some of us are countries, some of us are upstream countries, and our interest regrettably varies. But on the face of climate change, where the prediction is that most of the South Asian countries will become water scarce, I think we could do better if we could come together and talk about a common management scheme for the different river basins. Today, I'm being blasted by my society for the very bad state of air in the country. Not that I have created it, not that I have any quick fix for it, but it's the 3rd worst in the world, whereas I checked that Nepal's air condition is the 8th worst in the world. If we see the loss of GDP because of environmental degradation, studies say that in Bangladesh, we lose about 17% of our GDP due to different environmental contamination, which is accounted as 10% in Nepal. So as South Asian countries, we have to really, considering the vulnerabilities and the challenges and the prospects we have to really rethink the development model from a carbon intensive to a carbon neutral economic model. We seem to be very comfortable in saying that we don't emit that much carbon. But if we consider the state of air quality in our countries, we must think about what is it that's really causing the problem. And air pollution is not only a nationally created problem for Bangladesh, it also has a regional dimension because we get the polluted air coming to Bangladesh from our neighbors. There are also good examples that we could borrow from the region. For example, I myself have been to Nepal to learn about their very successful community forest management model. I know about the struggles of my friends in getting the Bagmati River cleaned. And last time when I went to Nepal this September only, I was really impressed to see the noise pollution being addressed there. I thought after Dhaka, Nepal, the Kathmandu was the noisiest city to land in, but I was surprised to see that the cars don't honk that much anymore. So I've taken all the legal development that Nepal has made to regulate noise pollution and trying to replicate that in Dhaka. In September, what took me to Nepal is the electricity sharing agreement that Ratnakar has just talked about. And when we think about how better could we perform in making our economy more carbon neutral, I think hydro can be a potential area. If we could only think as a region, if we could think as a region and increase our regional cooperation and remove the dust, the very dark cloud that still exists in strengthening the regional bond, Bangladesh itself could propose a regional grid in order to facilitate transmission of electricity, a cleaner energy from Nepal to Bangladesh, which is an energy-hungry country. So it's very important that we come together, we learn to think together, and we learn to act together. If we can do that, there, as Ratnakar was also pointing out, huge prospect for the region, not only in economic terms, but also in terms of environmental sustainability. We all know that we have a platform called SARC. There is need for SARC to be revitalized and revived on the face of all the climatic changes and the economic changes that we are confronted with. I don't really see a political vision for the region. I see political vision that the respective countries have, and sometimes the visions become so authoritarian, they become so narrow that we could never have that regional integrity that we actually need. We talk about South Asia, but we really do not identify ourselves as South Asians. I think that this South Asia Economic Summit and platforms like Southie can actually identify the limitations about the platforms that exist at the government level and can help in bridging the gaps by establishing people-to-people contact and communication. This has become very important, noting the frustrating outcomes of the different COPs that took place this year on climate change, on plastic, and on biodiversity conservation. We have much to offer as South Asian countries. We have much to offer to the region. And if we come together, we can actually solve many of our challenges. I would say that the South Asian Economic Summit has been pivotal in keeping the conversation alive on collaboration among our nations since its inception in 2008. This 15th summit has brought together an impressive era of panelists from across the region and beyond, providing a rich menu of topics under the Green Agenda: trade, investment, industry, tourism, finance, technology and innovation, climate justice, food security, and circular economy. As we engage in these discussions, let us remember that our collective efforts can lead to a sustainable future where economic growth does not come at the expense of our environment or our communities. Together, we can forge pathways that ensure prosperity for all South Asians while safeguarding the planet for our future generations. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Honorable Saida Rizwana Hassan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Interim Government, People's Republic of Bangladesh. To to move on with the remarks of the distinguished guests, I'd now call on the microphone Her Excellency Veronica, yeah, thank you, Lorenzo, Ambassador of the European Union Delegation to Nepal. Ma'am.
Honorable Minister, dear chairs, current chair, emeritus chair, dear Hannah, distinguished colleagues, guests, friends. Climate change and therefore climate transformation has been for a long time in our minds and for a little shorter in our lives. We've seen in our minds, we've made for more than a decade commitments now to produce less, to consume better. But this year in particular, we've felt it in our lives. With the floods, we had severe floods in Kathmandu, more severe than usual during the monsoon. We've also had very comparable floods in my country, in Spain, with over 200 dead. So it doesn't really matter, climate change does not choose its victims. South Asia has a pretty damning diagnosis in terms of integration. I think we've already heard that. This is it's one of the least integrated regions in the world, only 5% of inter-regional trade. Compare that to 63% for the European Union. And compounding that, a very high vulnerability. We've heard from the advisor to the Environment Minister in Bangladesh. To bring it to life, I always like to tell my European colleagues a couple of figures that are really quite shocking. By 2050, not so far away, 25 years, our water flows, the melting from the Himalayas will diminish. And there will start our water scarcity problems, as the advice mentioned. By 2080, we estimate that 70% of the permafrost will have melted. It's a disaster of an unimaginable scale. Air pollution, the advisor also talked about it. It affects our health. It affects our tourism as well. Certainly in Nepal, we don't see the mountains anymore. It is, and it will have very negative impact on the economy very soon. These are global problems. And there's no way around it but collective action. I represent the European Union. That is also a very diverse set of ethnicities and languages. But I think it's worthwhile looking at the European Union experience in terms of what we've managed to achieve over the past 2 decades. Because the European Union has really been a trailblazer. I'm not sure that's the best word to use. But in climate action, through our Green Deal, we've managed to reduce our emissions, our greenhouse emissions, by 37% since 1990. And this at the same time as continuing to have economic growth of 68%. So that clearly shows the disconnect we've managed to achieve between our fight against climate change and our economic model. In 2023, we've managed the biggest reduction in greenhouse emissions, 8.3%, just for the year, apart from the years of COVID-19. And the ambitions continue. We expect that it's not law yet, but the European Commission's proposal to the member states is to reduce emissions by 90% by 2040. And we expect this to be passed sometime next year in 2025. But the European Union is only 6% of global emissions. And therefore, unless it also promotes and encourages its external partners to follow suit, very little can be achieved only by the European Union. We're also, we've seen we've had the COPs. A word on climate finance, because that's been again on everybody's mind, especially in developing countries, especially in this region. There is, I should say, that there's a huge gap between the commitments and the needs, and there's been a lot of grumbling about the financial commitments. And yet, the European Union is the biggest climate finance provider, with over 28 billion euros in public finance and mobilizing over 7 billion euros in private finance. But without mobilizing a wider base of donors and without mobilizing private sector finance, we won't be able to cover a fraction of the needs. So the intention or the ambition of the European Union is really to help on the global energy transition to a fair, sustainable and ambitious global energy transition. Let me focus perhaps on more specific, what does it mean? Behind these reductions in global gas emissions, what do we actually do? How do we achieve that? And I would argue that perhaps the most important area is the energy transition. And as the EU, again, there is a lot of success in this energy transition, and it has been done collectively, despite the difficulties. This is pushed by need as well. This was very much pushed by the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and the need to cut dependency. But as a result, in 2023, we're 50% reliant on renewable energies. And by 2030, the ambition is to multiply by 2 the sources of renewable energy and to multiply by 3 the energy efficiency. Again, this is a target that's for the European Union, but that we also promote beyond, because the scale is what will make the difference. And we've been promoting global energy partnerships on renewable energy, but also on energy security. And in the region, because of this, our regional integration DNA, what matters, again, it's been already mentioned, is the regional electricity market. And Nepal has a huge role in it because of its potential. We talk about 28,000 megawatts being developed in the next 20 years. As we've heard about the agreement, the initial nominal agreement between Nepal and Bangladesh to purchase 40 megawatts, it's a start, but Nepal is also very much necessary for India's energy transition. And in this, we are investing heavily with a pipeline of about 1 billion euros to invest in future hydropower investments. This is for Nepal to export energy to its neighbors, but it's also for Nepal's energy transition itself. And we already see the success it has had in increasing. In the region, it's the country that's most increased its electric vehicles. This is one area, the energy transition, and where we have a lot to share and a lot to where we can support in all the countries. I speak of Nepal because I'm here, but similarly in India and Bangladesh, in Bhutan, we are supporting programs like this. The second area that needs to transition is the economy, the private sector. And it's first of all a mindset change. Green is the new economic model. Going green is not only a moral imperative, as we've sold it very often, it's good business. On circular economy, on energy efficiency for buildings, for industrial processes, all this transition is in itself a business. And to do that, we need more access to finance. So we have been working closely with banking institutions to change their mindset as well, to walk them through what these new business models are, how they can understand it, because unless they understand it, they won't be lending. And the lending has been increasing for climate resilient infrastructure, for green businesses, and also for greening cities. The new jobs we create, the new jobs we support in the region must be green if we have this transition. And my third point is about greening governments. Not everything can, of course, the core of the economy is private. But we also need this mindset change in government, a change in processes, in planning. Some functions can only be undertaken by the state. Waste management, water and sanitation. And the focus is very much on the cities. And certainly for Nepal, it corresponds to a very important transition, demographic transition with rapid urbanization of Kathmandu, but also of secondary cities. And lastly, what is a absolutely crucial role of the state is the disaster preparedness. There has been a lot of work has been going. It's not only the governments, we involve the armed police force in Nepal, the armed forces, the communities, the local governments, but it has to be initiated and coordinated by government. There's no way around it. And this will become more important as time goes by because the risk of disasters increases. So the challenges are there, but the models for adapting, for mitigating these challenges are also there. And the willingness to support, to encourage the transition, certainly from the European Union, will always be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Her Excellency Ms. Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassador of the European Union delegation to Nepal. I'd also take this opportunity to invite in the front row the co-organizers of the summit, the executive directors or the representatives from the organizers. Yeah, thank you. Let me now call upon Her Excellency Ms. Hannah Singer Hamdi, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Nepal, for her speech. Ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Chairperson, Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Honorable Minister, Damodar Bandari, Minister of Industry, Commerce and Supplies. Delighted to be also welcoming Honorable Ms. Sayeda Rizwana Hassan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Her Excellency, dear Ms. Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassador of the EU and a very dear friend, and another very dear friend, Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment. Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, Aibuwan. I wish if I can say more, but wonderful welcome to all of you. Frankly speaking, what an honor to join this gathering of thinkers and policymakers from across South Asia at the 15th South Asia Economic Summit. And really what an honor to follow two great also speakers and women leaders, both in the region, but also in Nepal. Now, colleagues and friends, your presence reflects our shared concerns, our collective resolve, and an unwavering commitment to address the region's challenges and advance a bold development vision. Now, amid a fractured global landscape where multilateralism and regional cooperation face significant headwinds, this summit, I think, stands as a beacon of hope. It is a testament to our belief that when South Asia comes together, our potential is limitless and our collective future can be brighter than ever imagined. Now, over the past 2 decades, South Asia has achieved remarkable progress. The region's economy has multiplied sixfold, and nearly 375 million individuals have been lifted out of poverty. Now, these achievements represent more than statistics. They embody transformed lives, empowered community, and a region poised for greatness. Yet this progress has brought South Asia also to a crossroad. Alongside aspirations for rapid economic growth, the region continues to face escalating climate challenges that threatens to reverse the hard-won gains, and the speakers before me, I think, have covered it very nicely. South Asia's relatively modest carbon footprint underscores its potential to lead by example the global fight against climate change. Per capita emissions here stand at just 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, less than half the global average. The Himalayan foothills with their green forests act as carbon-absorbing sponges, embodying the enduring wisdom of the Nepali slogan, Haryoban Nepal Ko Dan, green forests are Nepal's wealth. Yet these achievements do not insulate the region from the devastating impact of climate change. Now, climate impacts are already here, and we all know that. The Hindu Kush Himalayas, often called the third pole, is melting at an alarming rate, threatening water resources for over 2 billion people. Coastal and delta regions, including Sri Lanka and Maldives, where I lived and were my homes for years, face existential threats from rising sea levels. Natural disasters now affect an estimated 60 million people annually in South Asia. Heat stress alone could cause productivity losses equivalent to 43 million full-time jobs by 2030, exacerbating inequalities and undermining livelihoods. Now, given these challenges, can South Asia chart a low-carbon trajectory that fuels sustainable growth, tackles poverty, and reduces inequality? I believe the answer is a resounding yes. Let me highlight 4 reasons for optimism where really we can strive of leaving no one behind. First, the promise of a green and just transition. South Asia has an opportunity to create millions of sustainable jobs in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, and climate-resilient infrastructure. So embracing the circular economy by reducing material extraction and waste can generate net job gains if guided by the principles of just transitions. However, this requires proactive policies to address skill gaps, ensure labor mobility, and strengthen social safety nets. By investing in quality education and workforce development, we can turn the green transition into a source of empowerment and a source of equity. Second, the power of regional cooperation, again touched upon by previous speakers. By fostering the greater regional collaboration, South Asia can jointly develop and implement innovative adaptation strategies. So investments in public goods that enhance climate resilience, such as infrastructure, technology, and essential services, deliver high returns. For example, the market for affordable, energy-efficient cooling solutions in India alone represents $1.6 trillion investment opportunity. Together, we can unlock opportunities that benefit the region as a whole and amplify our collective impact. Third, advancing energy transition. The region has already made significant strides in greening its power sector. India, for example, ranks 4th globally in renewable electricity capacity. And Bhutan and Nepal generate nearly all their energy from hydropower. Solar energy is expanding rapidly, offering untapped potential. Deeper regional integration through cross-border energy projects and enhanced grid connections can optimize energy systems, smooth fluctuation in demand, and unlock efficiencies. South Asia has the potential to lead the world in clean energy innovations. Fourth and last, unlocking human potential. By addressing gender disparities and raising female labor force participation to match that of men, South Asia could boost per capita income by as much as 50%. Now, youth, with their creativity and determination, are at the heart of this transformation. Cross-border knowledge, sharing, and regional cooperation can accelerate progress, turning aspirations into achievements. So this summit is not just an opportunity to share ideas. It's a call for action. So let us think boldly, act decisively, and dream ambitiously. Let us harness South Asia's immense potential to lead an equitable green transformation. I am sure together we can turn vulnerabilities into strength, challenges into opportunities, and our region's climate story into one of resilience, into one of innovations, and into one of hope. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Ms. Hana Singer Hamdi, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Nepal. Now I invite the chief guest for his inaugural address, Honorable Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Minister, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, special guest Honorable Rizwana San, Advisor Minister of Environment and Energy Government of Bangladesh, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, distinguished resource person and participants, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste and warm greeting to you all. It is my privilege to stand before you today to inaugurate the 15th South Asia Economic Summit, an important event organized by Saudi, brings together some of the great minds from South Asia and beyond. This summit reforms our collective commitment to address these challenges of our region. Saudi, an eminent organization in the region, is a center of excellence in research, policy advocacy, capacity building, and networking, which has highly contributed to shaping the discourse on development, economics, and environmental sustainability across South Asia. Since 2008, the South Asia Economic Summit has become a vital platform for addressing various regional challenges, including trade, connectivity, economic development, climate change, social inequality, and other developmental issues. I am thankful to all the stakeholders involved in organizing this summit. The theme of this year's summit, Unleashing on Equitable Green Transformation in South Asia, is highly relevant to find the balance between economic growth and the environmental sustainability. Countries in South Asia are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. Moreover, widening social inequalities, disproportionately often that the poor and marginalized. This demands collective actions to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth. South Asia, united by geography, culture, and economic interdependence, can achieve far more together than any nation could alone. However, the region faces challenges such as poverty, elements, climate action, disaster management, and other development priority. Through regional cooperation, interconnectivity, and trade facilitation, we can ensure the effective implementation of regional initiative for collective prosperity. Nepal, at the heart of the Himalayas, is affected by climate change, which threaten water security, biodiversity, and livelihoods across the region. The melting glacier of the Himalaya will serve as a lifeline for millions across South Asia, demand coordinated efforts to protect and manage our shared resources. The 16th periodic plan of Nepal has prioritized climate resiliency and inclusive development to address the challenges posed by climate change. This summit provided an invaluable opportunity to explore solutions for a green transformation in South Asia, developing green value chain can create sustainable jobs, reduce environmental footprints, and enhance the competitiveness of our industries. Green finance must also be prioritized, mobilize investment for renewable energy, climate resilient infrastructure, and sustainable technology. Nepal is a nation rich in renewable energy resource, particularly hydropower, can contribute to South Asia green energy transition through knowledge sharing and innovation. We can collectively build a resilient, equitable, and sustainable South Asia. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the discussions and commitment we make during this summit, we open doors for many opportunities to address our unique challenges collectively. Let us seize this moment to reaffirm our shared vision for a South Asia that is prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable. Look forward to interactive session and productive discussion. Wish the 15th South Asia Economic Summit a great success. Together, let us build a future that uplift all our people and safeguard the planet for generation to come. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Honorable Sir. Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Minister, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal. Now, before the tea break, we have a very important chairman's remark remaining. May I invite Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chair Emeritus, Sauti, Nepal. Sir.
Namaste. Chief Guest, Honorable Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Minister, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies. Honorable Ms. Shayyada Rizwana Ashan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Interim Government, People's Republic of Bangladesh. Her Excellency Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassador of the European Union Delegation to Nepal. Her Excellency Hanna Singer Hamdi, United Nations Resident Coordinator, Nepal. Professor Raymond Chauvin, distinguished keynote speakers, moderators, panelists, and participants, friends from media, Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Chairman, South Asia Watch and Trade, Economics and Environment, and colleagues from Saudi. Well, a few days ago, on December 8th, SAARC celebrated its 40th Charter Day. When establishing SAARC, the people of South Asia envisioned a peaceful, stable, and progressive region. They were convinced that such a South Asia was possible through mutual understanding, good neighborly relation, and meaningful cooperation. In fact, it was an attempt to rediscover South Asia and reclaim its position in the global landscape. Consequently, we have identified various areas of cooperation, such as human resource development, tourism, agriculture, rural development, environment, natural disaster management, trade, finance, poverty alleviation, energy, transport, science and technology, and so on. However, the progress in the regional cooperation has not met our aspirations. And some op-ed commentators suggest that SAARC has been limping along for the last 40 years. The failure to hold regular summits has rendered it dormant, with little to show in terms of political consolidation and regional harmony. Notwithstanding, I believe that regional integration and cooperation is not a linear process. It is an evolutionary path marked by ups and downs. Achievement should be assessed in terms of direction and the cumulative progress, rather than the state of affairs at a specific point of time. Let me highlight what we have achieved rather than what we have missed. Intra-regional export increased from $9.2 billion in 2006, the year SAFTA came into force, to $39.73 billion in 2022, that is more than fourfold increase. In addition, some of the individual SAARC countries, the share of intra-regional trade is very high, and if we exclude trade between India and Pakistan, intra-SAARC trade turns out to be more than 20%. Second, with the implementation of SAFTA, the custom duties for intra-regional trade are either removed or reduced to 5%, except for products of sensitive list. India provides duty-free, quota-free market access to all least developed countries' trade, except alcohol and tobacco products. Third, some initiatives have been taken in reducing non-tariff barriers. And SARSO has developed regional standards. There has been significant progress on developing multimodal and cross-border transportation infrastructure. And South Asian countries have taken new initiative to facilitate trade and development, including ICPs. And there has been substantial improvement on trading across borders. The time and cost involved in exporting and border compliance has been reduced for almost all South Asian countries. We have concluded agreements in various areas such as food security, seed security, establishment of South Asian University, avoidance of double taxation, establishment of SAARC Development Fund, agreement on the suspension of terrorism, agreement on the rapid response to natural disaster, energy cooperation, environment cooperation, and there are many other areas. But it doesn't mean we have crossed the finish line. There are many unfinished agenda. We still face challenges in the implementation of various agreements, and I would say we failed in generating collaborative response to global rules on climate change, trade, and also development cooperation. Coming to the theme of the summit, the 6th assessment report of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change highlights South Asia's acute vulnerability to climate change, which is exacerbated by developmental constraint, pervasive poverty, governance challenge, and also reliance on climate-sensitive livelihood. It underscores the urgent need to transition to green economy, to reduce environmental risk and ecological scarcities while promoting sustainable development without degrading environment. Given the transboundary nature of the green economy, regional cooperation is not just beneficial, but it is critical. There is also considerable scope for knowledge sharing and forging cooperative pathways in areas such as industry, trade, infrastructure, finance, technology, agriculture development, energy, tourism, biodiversity, at regional, sub-regional, and bilateral levels. Thus, we have selected the theme of the 15th South Asian Summit as unleashing an equitable green transformation in South Asia. Today and over the next 2 days, We'll discuss key issues for green transformation and recommend actions to be taken at domestic and regional level, as well as at global level, particularly on issues of technology transfer, climate finance, and also climate justice. For the success of South Asia as an economic group, we need political will and commitment at the highest level. We need to transform our thinking and change our behavior towards our neighbor. We have to reinvent our security perception from traditional national security to societal security. We have to reinvent the state and the development paradigm to embrace regional cooperation, interdependence, inclusiveness, and sustainable development. If we do not change ourselves and continue to use the same language, we'll reproduce the same history. Last but not the least, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the chief guest, Honorable Mr. Damodar Bhandari, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies, Government of Nepal, Honorable Ms. Sayyeda Rizwana Hassan, Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Interim Government, People's Republic of Bangladesh, distinguished guest, Her Excellency Ms. Veronique Lorenzo, Ambassador of the European Union Delegation to Nepal, and Her Excellency Ms. Shamma Singhar-Handi, United Nations Resident Coordinator, for their gracious presence, both physical as well as virtual, and their continuous support. With this remark, I wish every success of this event. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Purushas Pandey, Chair Emeritus, SATI Nepal. Let's invite ourselves for refreshments, tea break for a half hour before we have the opening plenary on developing green value chains in South Asia and agenda for cooperation. Tea break, gentlemen, ladies, and the distinguished guests. Yeah, thank you. So here we begin. The opening plenary, Developing Green Value Chains in South Asia, an Agenda for Cooperation. Mr. Devapriya Bhattacharjee with me, so that we are, thank you, sir. Yeah. To wireless ma audio dinunai. The
Here you go. Yeah. So.
Dr. Abid Kayyum Suleri, if you can hear me, we'd invite you on stage, please.
Good evening, everybody, colleagues from South Asia and beyond. It is your unique privilege that you are stuck with me for the next 2 hours. May I invite all others who are still outside for this very important session, the first plenary, and I will request the organizers to close the door, at least to the front one. Please keep the behind one open if somebody wants to get in from there. As you know, this is the opening plenary, the curtain-raising session, and the subject is Developing Green Value Chains in South Asia, an Agenda for Cooperation. And we are very privileged to have a person no less than Professor Rehman Soban, the founder chairman of Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, Dhaka, as the keynote speaker. And we have a set of very distinguished panelists, not because they are all my friends, but because they're really distinguished in their own rights. Dr. Poshraj Pandey, as you know, is the Chair Emeritus of SWATI. Dr. Pritam Banerjee, Head and Professor of the WTO Studies Center in Delhi. Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja is a professorial fellow currently and with the Gateway House and also with the ODI UK. Dr. Abid Suleri is the Executive Director of SDPI in Islamabad. And Dr. Rupa Chanda, who is the Director at the UNESCAP in Bangkok. So as you can see, we have a set of very illustrious economists, experts from 6 countries of the world, and we will be all listening to them. And I promise you there will be time for you to also take part in the discussion and raise issues and questions and give your comments. So with those words, and I am known as a very rough timekeeper, rough, not tough. So, and that I will be demonstrating it again. The only challenge is the keynote speaker is my guru, Professor Rehman Soban, and as you can understand, for a disciple to control the time of the chair for this senior is not an easy task for me. But we will try to see what can be done. But before I get into the discussions and invite Professor Rehman Soban to speak and deliver the keynote address, I would like to recall that since our last meeting, we have lost a very important person of our South Asian community, Professor Muchkund Dubey. He left us recently, and he was one of the South Asian personalities who have really inspired us and taken us this far in our efforts to build an integral humanity in the region. So if you allow me, with all your permission and the permission of the organizers, is it okay, Posh? Posh? It's fine. So with your permission, I am proposing a minute of silence in memory of Dr. Mujkund Dubey. Please. Thank you. Please take your seats. So I will start the session with the keynote speech from Professor Reman Soban. Professor Reman Soban needs no introduction in this house. One of the father figures of our South Asian solidarity. Many of us have learned our economics at his feet and had been a great institution builder, a national thought leader of many dimensions, and it is a unique privilege for us, for the SAES 15, to have him as the opening speaker, as the keynote speaker. As mentioned, he will be speaking on the theme, Developing Green Value Chains in South Asia, an agenda for cooperation. But I'd be missing my lessons if I try to give a theme to Professor Soban. You will soon see how he transpires across themes over there. Sir, the floor is yours. 20 minutes max, sir.
Friends and fellow travelers on the road to South Asia. I was both touched and impressed that Deb remembered the contribution of Mujkund Dubey. He was a person with whom I traveled on this road for many years. We were members of the group of eminent persons on the future of SAARC. And of course, he chaired for many years the South Asia Center for Policy Studies, where CPD and other organizations here were partnered. But more important than his institutional connections, Mujkund Dubey was a passionate believer in South Asia emerging as a community. Sadly, with his passing, the number of people who I find who are passionately committed to the idea of South Asia, and when I use the word passion, I don't use this as an indication that we will participate in conferences and meetings, but to attach significance and value to the idea of a South Asian community. In the last occasion that I addressed the SAES summit in Kathmandu, I had paid a similar tribute to the late Saman Kalegama, another person of deep passion. And now that I see that the people of passion are departing from the scene, I once again sort of look out to another generation to see whether this idea will be sustained or whether in a changing global international and geopolitical order, this passion will in fact dissipate and other passions will emerge. But anyway, I leave this more as a lament before I move on. Now, in my inaugural address, I've been asked to address the issue of green value chains, agendas for cooperation. I would not be the first choice of anyone seeking to have a conversation on green issues. I do know a bit about value chains, and I can perhaps say more about cooperation or the lack of it on South Asia's journey. Obviously, before we move on to develop green value chains, we need to develop strong, diversified, sustainable value chains across South Asia. And I do not need to add the word green to that. The real problem of South Asia has been its inability to actually develop such value chains. Now, South Asia's history is one of fractured value chains. The Himalayas, the Hindu Kush, Karakoram, these were part of our common inheritance and remain so. And they created an economic, ecological zone which was designed to be integrated and operated collectively by the people of this region. And it was part of a shared ecosystem for us. Land, water, air, these were common resources. Unfortunately, over the course of history, the historical process fractured what was our inheritance by nature. And this is the problem that we have faced for many years. People of the region who were the inheritors of this common ecological inheritance over there were themselves supposed to be the beneficiaries of this process, but became its casualties. Historical boundaries have now cut across what should have been shared natural resources. Present political landscape is really made up of history's war with geography. Therefore, this is the real context in which we need to really discuss the problem of common problem of constructing value chains. Now, over the years, if you look at this issue, I was reflecting that the whole discussion about building value chains across South Asia was part of the conversation in the very first SAES summit, which was convened in Colombo by Saman Kalegama. And according to my calculations, we have gone on discussing this over, let's see now, in the homework that I did, in the first summit in Colombo, in the third in Kathmandu, in the 8th in Islamabad, in the 10th again in Kathmandu, in the 13th in New Delhi, and in the 14th in Dhaka. In all of these various issues relating to cooperation, but where the conversation on constructing value chains was a very central element, came up for discussion. What I think would have been a very helpful contribution to the present discussion is to contextualize this by seeing how we looked at the issue of constructing value chains, what we were talking about in 2008, how this situation emerged, and where we stand today. And what you would then come across over here is an approach to cooperation which has really failed to really construct the value chains which are integral to the processes of economic cooperation. It is not that cooperation has not taken place in the area of trade and various other forms of economic interaction, but the promise of this has been far from encouraging. If I was looking at the numbers very recently, to look at how South Asia's value chains have really been constructed in terms of trade, then I found that if you compare the situation within South Asia, its movement has been modest by international standards. In fact, if you look at China's trade with South Asia, between 2013 and 2023, its total trade with South Asia increased by $104 billion. But trade within South Asia was a fraction of that figure. the biggest trading partner within South Asia, which would be India, increased its trade by $17 billion in this particular period of time. Of course, we could recognize the fact that the main changes in China's trade with South Asia were mostly with India. But even if you compare the trade of India with the remaining countries of South Asia and China's trade, you still find that there is a sort of significant, the greater level of trade going on. Now, this is a manifestation of our inability to build the necessary structural changes within the economies of South Asia, which would have enabled us to build and to expand and strengthen value chains and make them more sustainable. And here I would like to point out that the crucial role which needed to be played over here was again by the larger economies, because the nature of market forces did not emerge in such a way that the necessary structural changes would take place. India did make some important concessions, as has been pointed out earlier on in the inaugural session, in which they provided duty-free access to the smaller countries. But the big problem we faced in this period, particularly in Bangladesh, for example, was that we could not bring about the necessary structural changes to take full advantage of this process. We did certainly expand our exports, particularly to India, but most other countries really did not make any substantial changes. And what we now need to ask ourselves, because we've been asking ourselves in SAES now for the best part of 15 or 16 years, that what are basically the preconditions which prevailed? I mean, again, by way of comparison, if you look at the construction of value chains across the world, particularly in our neighborhood, if you look at the value chains constructed by China with its Southeast Asian and East Asian neighbors, you will find that enormous transformations have taken place in the regional economies in that particular area to accommodate themselves to this. This has been our problem. Now, if you want to talk about constructing green value chains, you can only do so if you build this upon already existing value chains, which are manifested through the working of trade, through the movement of capital, through the transfers of technology. Otherwise, the exercise of constructing green value chains is essentially going to be a problem which will go on, issue which will be discussed largely at the academic level. Now, if you look across the region, we have to see that a strong and cooperative South Asia will only be an abstraction unless there are concrete, mutually identified needs which should be coming forward to bind us together. I mean, historically, those of us who have traveled this road always believed that we had very strong and logical needs. But what you found over the years again was that an asymmetrical perspective emerged over here. Now, if you look at the problems of Bangladesh, if you look at the problems of Nepal, of Sri Lanka, all of us have very strong potential for strengthening our economic relations with our larger neighbor. Much less goes on in terms of our interaction with the smaller neighbors. Now, in the context of constructing green value chains, my memory goes back to the first volume of George Verghese, when he, in his famous book about using the resources of the Himalayas to bring the region together. And it was George Verghese, I think, who drew attention, and I remember that this volume goes back to the early 1970s, to the idea that the Himalayan waters, with Nepal and Bhutan at the source of these waters, would in fact emerge as a major resource for the region. He was then not using the vocabulary of green, but he was really using the vocabulary of building strong energy value chains originating in the resources of the Himalayas. In those days, we were a massively energy deficit area, and the idea was that the Himalayan waters would in fact provide a resource for this region which would compensate for our deficit in terms of the traditional sources of energy. Now that simply faded away in our romantic imagination. The projects, the scope for change has come forward very slowly. The narrative of cooperation between India and Nepal has a long history and an underlying political economy. And of course, new elements in the greening discourse have also impacted on that discussion. Bhutan has of course become a major source of export of water-related energy to India. And it is only after 50 years that discussions are going on about using that resource for serving Bangladesh. Reference was made to the export of 40 megawatts of energy from Nepal to Bangladesh. Now, this is taking place in 2024. Ideas about constructing that energy grid predate the emergence of SARC itself. In fact, the first rounds of discussion which took place amongst the think tanks of South Asia in what was known as the CSCD group had already put on the table ideas about constructing an energy grid for South Asia. And at the center of the energy grid, of course, was the idea of drawing upon the hydro resources of the Himalayas to serve this region. But unfortunately, 40 megawatts is the beginning, but it is really not even the beginning of a major transformation, particularly when we are talking about green energy. Now, let me round up my presentation over there by saying that while South Asia stumbles along the road to constructing value chains which can really integrate us, we are living in a much more radical and transformative world order. And new value chains which did not exist before are now emerging and creating new areas of cooperation and constructing new communities. This process is going on at a time where the global order is itself going through a major transformation. We are witnessing a process of deglobalization on the one hand, as the wheel has turned full circle, and those who in fact were the advocates and ambassadors of globalization, the US and the West, have begun to move away as their competitive capacities have depreciated against the emerging globalizers of the Asian region. A much more dangerous development also you have to take into account is the weaponization of the international economic regime, where both trade, investment flows, and also now technology trade has become increasingly compromised by its use as a political resource. And this again is an area which has to be taken into account, because whilst we are talking about an integrated and cooperative world, if in fact now each relationship has to pass the test of, pass a geopolitical test to determine whether this economic relationship will be sustained or it will have to be compromised in order to accommodate to someone else's geopolitical concerns, this is going to again impact on all of us. There are, I'm told now, technologies emerging where the stratosphere can be drawn upon, and in fact interventions can take place to affect the quality of climate in particular countries. In fact, not many of you will be familiar with the fact that in the Vietnam War, the United States used the technology for seeding the clouds in order to bring about large quantities of rainfall in order to compromise the logistics of the Viet men they were fighting. And as a result of that, a special treaty was enacted so that, in fact, environmental resources and technological intervention could not be used for such purposes. But now, as the global economy becomes a competitive space and is being weaponized, where one country can in fact put pressure on others or other groups of countries, there is no saying that technology can now also be not used as a weapon in the way in which you deal with people in a situation where climate can be both a resource and can be your enemy.
Sir, 4 minutes more, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, in my concluding remarks, I would like to talk about the possibilities of what South Asia can do when we look ahead. We are in Kathmandu, which has been the headquarters of SAARC. SAARC is now a virtually defunct organization. I'm not sure whether we are going to ever contemplate whether it is going to actively be revived. At one stage, you witnessed the ups and downs of the SAARC process, depending at that time on the state of intergovernmental relations, particularly between India and Pakistan. But other conflictual relationships also emerge in the region, and that impacts on SAARC. Now, certainly in the areas that we are talking about, whether it is of developing, strengthening, and sustaining value chains, or whether we are addressing the greening of the green value chains and the discussions which will be going on over the next 3 days, the idea that you will need some institutional platform which can bring all this together is another imperative. SAES, for all the commending role that it has played since 2008, is not going to be integrating South Asia. It will have to be done through an intergovernmental process. And here we will have to ask whether this process can move forward given the prevailing political confrontations which have had undermined the development of SAARC. And here I think we need to take important lessons again from other regions, including Southeast Asia and East Asia, where even where there have been confrontational relationships between countries, the compulsions and the mutual benefits of operating through a shared perspective have overridden their geopolitical concerns. Now here I would think that the important contribution that SAES could make to this process is to keep the idea alive that much is to be gained out of the process of cooperation, the important possibilities that we can rediscover in terms of reviving the SAARC process, and to not just leave it there, but to take this conversation forward and to initiate discussions with government policy makers. Now, over here in the present gathering, I do not see too many people, perhaps there may be some from Nepal, who would be currently involved in the policy-making process in developing South Asian cooperation. At the recent summit that we had in Dhaka, we brought along the planning minister from Bangladesh, who of course was a good soul and made all the right remarks, but unfortunately he was very low on the totem pole in exercising influence and policy making in Bangladesh, and now of course is defunct minister maybe in rather more unfortunate circumstances. But our chief advisor, Professor Yunus, a Nobel laureate who is known to all of you, has been one of the first leaders of SAARC in recent years who has actually spoken up on the importance of SAARC for promoting greater cooperation. And he hasn't just done it on one or two occasions. Every time he had occasion to address a wider audience, he has spoken of SAARC. He went through some conscientization because he was a board member of the South Asian Center for Policy Studies and discussed and participated in discussions. So we do not know whether there are other people. I don't know what the mood is in Nepal about the SAARC process, but they need to get together and to see whether they can then play a catalytic role in encouraging other partners to go ahead. Again, much really depends on the political process, so I would hope that SAES would compensate for whatever is happening at the higher tiers and go on playing this role of identifying processes of cooperation, but should not just treat this as an academic exercise. And I keep reiterating this in sort of successive summits, and to see that this is a process which can be carried forward. It should not end when at the end of this particular summit you get on the plane and fly home and then get preoccupied with national and trans-South Asian agendas. I mean, how far you interconnect with each other, how far you initiate research programs which discuss the process of South Asian cooperation will be a measure of the seriousness with which you take this process. And lastly, for the next SAARC summit, because I made this recommendation at the previous summit, please look back at the SAES history and look at all the areas of cooperation you identified, and then let us have presentations made on how the narrative has progressed and what is the objective stage of cooperation in particular areas, and to then see where we have been held back and where we can move forward. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, participants and guests, I assured you that we are going to hear not only about concepts, but also practicality, history, geography, anthropology, sociology, and geostrategy, all punched into one. And that was Professor Rehman Sobhan giving us the keynote address. Join me once again in thanking him for that. If I would have given the chance, I would headline it, sir, if you allow me, your speech, keep the spirit alive. That is possibly one of the message which has come through, keep the spirit alive. Professor Sobhan has mentioned that his understanding of building a value chain is based on shared resources, and that is what we have had once in this region. And then, of course, he talked about the extra-regional factors coming in and gave a very pertinent comparison how extra-regional economic forces have had better integration than we ourselves within the region in many ways. And referring back to the venerated George Verghese' work in this area on the rivers as being the common resources and how we could bring together. Professor Sobhan also reminded us the current globalization issue, the openization of the trade which is going on, but at the same time, how the new role of the technology, which can also bring us together. And I'm grateful that Professor Sobhan also mentioned about not only the SAARC. I was asking Posh what happened to the SAARC Secretary General. Posh assured me, Posh, am I saying it right? Please alert him. Are you talking to the SAARC Secretary yet? So I just checked with you whether you invited the SAARC Secretariat or not. He said he did, and they declined politely. So that also speaks about the SAARC. And here again also the role of SAES, Professor Sobhan reminded. I can tell you from my personal knowledge from the last 2 months, 3-4 months, that during the last UNGA meeting in New York, Professor Yunus was very keen, and I accompanied him to the UNGA meeting, and I was part of the process. And I know it from for a fact that he was very keen to have a South Asian heads meeting. The time was not coming through properly because the heads were visiting at different times across the week. But nonetheless, he was very keen. Even if you don't get the head of these governments, let us get the head of the governments at the secretary, minister level. Even if you don't get the ministers, at least get the ambassadors level. That didn't succeed. That was the political reality within which we have to operate. But I can see when the first opportunity came, when Professor Yunus was invited through a call by Prime Minister Modi to address the South-South conference in Delhi, he readily agreed and spoke to the Delhi audience over there, which shows his commitment to South Asia. I can give you more personal anecdotes on that, but that's for another time. But colleagues, we have very extraordinary panel at this moment with us. Each of them are my friends, and so if I really put in good words, don't think that this is because of the friendship, because each of them in their own right is a star in their own country, and also they themselves globally known and in the region. And I think Swati has done extraordinary service in putting them all together in the stage. I think the photograph itself will speak for itself in the future. So let me start with Posh. The idea is I will give each of them 5 minutes to make an initial statement so that they can take out what they have in their mind. And each of them will come from their own perspective and speciality and their current concerns. And after that, I think we'll open up the floor. We'll open up the floor if a couple of queries or if you want to interrogate them, inquisition, whatever you want to do, and then they will again respond back on their own to pick on some of the issues. So by that time, you'll be ready for the dinner. So let me start. Posh, your 5 minutes. What do you have in your mind? Please speak from there. No, coming and going will take time. Take the microphone. Yeah, take the microphone.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dev. Well, let me start with the October 2024 South Asia Development Update of the World Bank. And it says South Asia remains the fastest growing emerging market and developing economy region in the world. But there are environmental costs for these growth stories. The region is currently contributing disproportionately to global greenhouse gas emission. The region's share of greenhouse gas emission is more than twice its share in global GDP. That is, in terms of per unit of output, South Asia's emissions are almost twice the global average. I mean, here, in order to minimize environmental impact of growth and ensure sustainable use of natural resources through material and energy efficiency, promotion of green value chain, in a series of activities throughout the life cycle of product and services could be a key policy instrument. I mean, here the question is, how can we promote green value chain? Or to put it differently, what are the policies that encourage sustainable practice throughout the life cycle of product and services? The first one, it is a regulatory framework that is establishing laws and regulation that mandate environmental standard and practices for the business. Second, incentive and subsidies that is providing financial incentive such as tax incentive, tax break, tax subsidies, and for the companies that adopt green technology and practice. Third, that is the certifications and standard. To ensure companies adhere to environmental management practice. Fourth, that is public-private partnership, that is encouraging collaborations of government, private sector, and non-government organizations to promote sustainable practices. Fifth, that is research and development, particularly of green technology and sustainable practices. Sixth, promotion, that's the education and awareness, particularly awareness campaign to inform business and consumer about the benefit of green value chain. And another, policy instrument could be financial support for green project and initiative. That also includes, maybe that could be grant or maybe low interest rate. And then much more, in regional context, much more important would be the trade policy, trade and investment policies. That is, implementing trade and investment policies that support green value chain as well as circular economy. This could be like a reduced tariff for environmental goods and services, trade facilitation, and other measures. So here, we can have policy at the domestic level, but if we have regional cooperation, within the region, then that would reinforce our domestic initiative.
Thank you.
I think I stop over here.
Yeah, excellent point. I think, please, colleagues, give a hand to Dr. Poshraj Pandey. He has essentially laid out the basic principles for a global value chain to emerge and to survive. And he, of course, brings in the case of having an incentive structure and also subsidies. One of the important element of the incentives. One is tempted to ask, what are the opportunity costs? Can we fiscally afford that? And whether there will be seizure by powerful groups of those or not, that's another question. But the point is very valid. The private-public partnership issue, the issue of technology and education, the issue of green finance, and finally the trade and investment policies. Thank you. I think Dr. Posh has given us a framework, the policy framework within which the cooperation may take place. Whether it is actually feasible or not, that's a different question, but thank you for that framework. So let me go to Dr. Preetam Banerjee, the head of and professor at the Center for WTO Studies. It's in Delhi, isn't it? Yes. In Delhi. And since Posh ended with the trade policy and investment policy, I think that would be a good cue for you to take up. Please take your time for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and given the brutal timekeeping by the moderator, quick thank you to Swati and all. You see,
usually it is said, I have learned from people, that if you are a moderator, either you will have a pretty face or you'll be very tough with the time. Since I don't have the first one, I'm doing the second job.
Absolutely. No, but a quick thank you to Swati for the privilege of being here and partnering with us. So quickly, if we think about a green value chain in South Asia, what are the different components we can think of? One could be the fact that you have, as was mentioned in the earlier session, production of green energy. So you have energy produced from green resources, hydroelectricity being one, and for energy intensive products, that's an important part of the total value of production. So that becomes an input that is part of the green value chain. Similarly, in the other great transformation, so if the energy transition is one great transformation the world is looking at, the second one is the digital transformation that we are going through. And as we all know, that the digital transformation is extremely energy intensive when you run data centers and servers. And countries have thought about that, in South Asia, Bhutan, for example, to create this kind of green energy to power the digital revolution over here. So that's another input into the value chain which extends to services. There could also be intermediates that could connect this region in terms of sustainably sourced products. So we have emerging regulations globally like the UDR, which requires you to source products which are not from land that has been deforested, etc. So one could look at those kind of inputs. So there are possibilities of that. A more traditional approach in which Poshraj was mentioning is this concept of green goods. And there we have the so-called APEC list of green products that are traded globally. You know, this is a list of goods that have been identified as green goods. But interesting numbers there is that this whole trade is dominated by a few countries, and South Asian countries are nowhere in the picture. So if I look at the top exporters, there are totally 52 of these goods, of which, you know, if I look at the top 3 countries, then China is a top 3 exporter in 37, European Union in 47, EU in 33. The other countries are the usual suspects who dominate the global manufacturing value chain. So you have Korea, Vietnam, Poland, Mexico, etc. So again, South Asia is not really a very important player in this whole aspect. But what I think is going to become, you know, very interesting in terms of these value chains is that most of these products have a very high embedded intellectual property as its value. And therefore, this dominance of these value chains by a handful of firms. And technology transfer is really the central piece of how, you know, countries can enter into this value chain. Now, there, as we have increasing digitalization and use of Internet of Things in many of these products. So for example, take wind turbines, which are now being maintained remotely using Internet of Things. You are going to have even deepening of these kind of IPR-related values in these products. Additionally speaking, when you have what we call certification of manufacturing, that is also going to lead to an increased IPR. So that technology transfer bit then becomes an important part of that debate. All of this is to, you know, take us to this huge challenge that we have globally emerging rules such as CBAM, such as UDR, which would require compliance for every member country, every country in the world, you know, and South Asian countries are no exception. The question is, can we at least try to come up with strategies that will help each other deal with it? Of course, there's another separate debate on if we can challenge some of these measures as being unfair, and that's what I would like to probably speak if I get a chance in the second round of discussions. But the question is, you know, are there ways by which we can help each other in terms of being, you know, as Poshraj mentioned, every unit of production in South Asia is one of the highest in terms of its carbon footprint. Can we do something in terms of our value chain to reduce that footprint? So that's really, you know, what we are staring at. What we are staring at, you know, is that we are all dependent on large markets outside our region. Let's not be, complacent. Interregional trade and all of that is fine, but all our economies depend on European, North American, and other markets. And if those markets start creating barriers which require a response in being able to reduce our carbon footprint in production, that would require some amount of collaboration and cooperation. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Banerjee has taken us down through a number of important issues. He made a sectoral focus on energy. That could be one of the very high potential sector for doing green value chain, and referring to Bhutan's role in this case. He talks about the goods, in green goods, how much we can do that. And that brings him to I think the critical issue of technology, and more importantly, intellectual property right issues. And the global rules in this regard. And he ends up by saying that the supply chain pressure coming from the markets, the Europe and elsewhere, may be also one of the transformative factors in the future, as we will see how the global market itself can push the regional market to transform towards a much more greener economy. Thank you very much, sir, for that. Let me move on to Ganesh. Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja, I know him from 1992 from the Oxford days. Ganesh has been in different capacities from Asian Development Bank to think tanks and many other places. I'm so pleased to have him now under my time control. Ganeshan.
Thank you very much. Talk about technology, this doesn't work. So I get 30 seconds extra. I want to start by really bringing out 5 points, and I'm going to talk about global supply chains, which I'm more comfortable with rather than the concept of value chain in this context. The first point is the elephant in the room, right? Decoupling from China is likely to hasten faster under Trump Mark II or Trump 2.0 with mixed prospects for supply chains in South Asia and its sectors, including green ones. And the proposition I have is that this is very much a story about India, and can it seize the Trump-Modi partnership that we think was there in Mark I, and India could raise its share of global supply chains measured by intermediate goods trade to maybe 3%, up from 1.5, right? Bangladesh and Sri Lanka can be part of that. Question mark about the others, including Nepal, because of the trade costs. So that's the first point I want to make. But services could be there. Second point is that it makes sense to look at this question of green value chains through looking at companies and firms. And I think these theories of technical change and industrial competitiveness are very useful. We know that firm size matters to join these supply chains, as does investments in technological capability. And then the other bit of this is really more recent research that says that what matters is not the tier one suppliers so much in a supply chain, those linked directly to the multinational and therefore do the environmental standards and compliance, but the tier two and tier three suppliers where the gaps come, and those raise big risks to multinational corporations in these chains.
But Ganesh, the tier one companies are bigger in size than the tier 2 and 3.
Yes.
That the
yes.
size matters over there.
Size matters, as does technical capability and compliance costs for the multinational, right? So we need to think of tier 2, tier 3, and even tier 4 suppliers. And I think we need to unpack this question of value chains. I think dealing just at the macro level is not sufficient. Yep. Third point about public policy. We talk a lot about this. I think we really need to go back to getting the basics right. This means open FDI and trade policies, macro policy and consistency, cost-competitive infrastructure, and secondary education. For me, these are fundamentals. Industrial policy, great, but little bit cautiously, invest in renewables in the energy mix, sure, little bit of directed credit to SMEs to take these new standards, etc. But the health warning about industrial policy applies. We don't have the capability in South Asia to implement East Asia-style policies. We don't have the fiscal space to do this stuff. We need to think about this very carefully because industrial policy can make matters worse. I want to bring that in. Yeah. Fourth point, the RCI institution, SARC, of course, is defunct, as Professor Shoban said. BIMSTEC has had summit postponed. India is interested. Is Thailand? That's a question mark. IORA is another one. But we need to retool all of these. They only have budgets of 3 million and so on. They don't have an agenda for supply chains, let alone green ones. So I think these need to be retooled if they're going to be useful. Last point about development partners. MDBs, multilateral development banks, particularly the World Bank, can be a game changer in financing green investments. And they can finance SMEs to do sustainability standards and improve the tier 2 and 3 tier suppliers, as I was saying. They can also finance clean energy, right, and transport. And the last thing they should do is lots of knowledge and policy dialogue. So those are my 5 points. Happy to come back in the chat, Dev, as needed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was a very green presentation, 1 minute efficiency saving on that. So thank you, Ganesh, on that. I think the 5 points you make are really good. The first one is about the changing global politics and the Trump 2 version, what it will mean for the South Asia. But you say it's India may benefit provided the politics is right in certain ways with Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump. But not so much luck for others. But if through hub and spokes method if something happens, we'll see. But the second point was through companies, size matters, so multinationals. As you will see, he is very much in terms of what I would call the open FDI person in many ways. So on the company size, and then the third is the public policy, open FDI, and he is also very much confident, or he's enthusiastic about the role of the MDBs and how do you really energize the regional cooperation institutions in the future, and for that matter, dialogue is important, and that way. Thank you very much for that. I think we are progressing. Are we? Oh, you want your dinner? Oh, you want both? Usually that is the case, that people want the discussion and their dinner at the same time. There is a trade-off at this moment between your physical need and the mental challenges over here. I have two more great speakers out there. Let's listen to them, and then I will come back to you on that. So let me invite Abid Suleri, another great friend for long years in Dhaka and elsewhere, and we enjoyed his hospitality in Islamabad on a number of occasions. He is a global figure on the environmental issues. So Abid, your floor.
Thank you. You see, even if the supply chains, value chains are fragmented in the region, I think it's a moment for transformational changes. And these transformational changes, they are there due to some internal as well as external factors. And I'm referring to urbanization, I'm referring to some economic growth and emerging middle class in most of the countries. I'm referring to how climate change is impacting food security in our region, and of course the transport need, and finally CBAM, this carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now when we talk of carbon border adjustment mechanism, which mean that those currently who will be exporting to EU, if their carbon emission level across supply chain is higher than what is permissible in EU, they will be subject to some sort of carbon tax if they haven't paid that tax in their own country. But it's not only the EU CBAM that is that I'm concerned of. I know that the UK is also preparing its version of CBAM. Australia is quite advanced on it. US, after the Trump takes over, would be coming up with its own CBAM, and when all of them, they would be having their carbon border adjustment mechanism, China would also have, which means that literally every trading partner that the region is trading with, our exporters, they would have to not only measure their emission, they would also have to see how to reduce those emissions, and they would also have to get credit for it, which means the technology for measurement, the technology for reducing them, and also the international certification which is acceptable in other territories. And that would somehow change the whole concept of supply chain and value chain that we are talking, and that Ganesham-ji has very rightly mentioned about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and 4. Now, if I look at some of the areas, some of the challenges that the region is facing, the first and foremost challenge for me is technology. Apart from India, where we have some domestic certifiers, all other countries would have to go to either VERA or gold standards or other standards which are actually being maintained and prepared and certified by international certification companies. Engaging them, paying their cost in dollars, that would be extremely difficult for tier 2 and tier 3 countries. And that's why we need some sort of regional certification and regional standards. I think if one single message I have to give in this conference, that is that we need to come up with some sort of regional certification and regional standardization on green
Abid, let
chains.
me ask you a question. No, it's not the time issue.
I'm looking at time
It's a
as well.
space issue. So the question is this regional certification. Are you referring it to as an intergovernmental process, or it could be also a private-public partnership? It could be also private as well.
This is what I was coming to. So in
Yes.
the current CBAM, textile is not included. But Pakistan's textile sector, in anticipation of its inclusion from 2026, they have already started working on it. And our bigger exporters, they are already doing their carbon audits, they are already getting their emission level measured, and they are looking at alternative technologies. So I think even if the governments, and I don't, pragmatically speaking, I don't see an inter-regional standards coming up, but at least it's a private-private collaboration, some certification and standardization company which is not necessarily based in any single country, which is there, maybe a subsidiary of Virar Gold Standard. I think that can be one of the entry points, and our development partners, they can play an important role in it. The second important thing that we require in this is technology gap, how to meet these technological requirements. And the third is market access. Do we have market access for green products? We are still struggling to market our organic products. Of course, Nepal is one of the exceptions. But many other countries where we have abundance of organic produce, we're still struggling with their market access. So thinking of this green market access and green certification, that is another area that we require to focus on. And finally, I think the forums like SAES and others, irrespective of geopolitical problems that challenge the progress in this region, I think these forums, they can play an important role. Yep. We had during COP29 an excellent panel on air quality where we had experts from Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Pakistan discussing about air quality issues, and we didn't require any permission from any government. So I think this forum and the other forums like this, they can take a lead, and they can come up with some sort of regional knowledge sharing platform on greening our value chains. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abid. Colleagues, you may be following that how the discussion is evolving. Huh? Starting from the framing of the issue from POSH, we moved on to the other trade investment policy issues along with that, and specific sectors like energy. We have also heard about the global framework which is changing the role of the MNCs and others, and now we are talking about market access. Even if we have that, and how do you really pursue that? But I think the discussion has had a natural flow in many ways. I would like to thank you and all the speakers, but you know, I have kept the best for the last and have Dr. Rupa Chanda. I have seen her in various incarnations during her Bangalore days and Delhi days, and now in Bangkok. She's an extremely well-known person during her earlier days as the expert on services trade, and now she is a director at UNESCAP Bangkok. So good to see you, Rupa. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, I think a lot of what I wanted to say has been already mentioned, but let me just...
Good things can be always repeated.
Yeah, well, let me step back first. Actually, the point that was made by the keynote speaker, which is when we talk about regional value chains, green value chains, the first question is really about developing those value chains and having the industrial and manufacturing and other strategies, the diversification of the economy, the structural transformation of the economy that is needed before you can even talk about entering a value chain, and let alone a regional or global value chain. So that's important. And here, you know, if you look at the statistics for the countries, you know, we all know that the manufacturing competitiveness issue is a challenge in this region. And similarly, even in services, there isn't a sufficiently diversified services basket.
No, just I wanted to ask, do you see the prospect more in the services than in the manufacturing?
Not necessarily. I think we have to look at value chains in a much more holistic way. There is the manufacturing part, then also services embedded within manufacturing. So different countries may have different competencies within this. But I just wanted to take a step back and say that we have to address this basic question, because only then you can, look at the domestic reforms, measures, openness, all those things that have to go in order to get into a regional value chain or global value chain. That's one. Number two is in terms of the perspective that you need on greening of value chains. And I think Preetham touched upon this already. What are the elements, right? So sometimes we refer to it as which are the sectors where you can have more sustainability and, different processes of production. But I would see it as a sort of end-to-end thing. The distribution, the logistics, the transport, techniques of production, the kinds of products. So there's a scale, scope of activities, a composition of what you're producing, how you're producing, how you're transporting, how you're distributing. All of this has to be looked at in terms of a greening of the value chain. So with that perspective, let me come to what I see as some key elements. This is not complete, but some of it has been touched upon. First and foremost, I think investment policies, very important, both domestic investment as well as foreign direct investment. And here, a key issue is really how do you capacitate countries to develop national strategies, national roadmaps, which prioritize certain sectors into which you can attract investments. And this is particularly true for FDI. I'm saying this based on work we are doing with boards of investment and investment promotion agencies. How do you identify those sectors or segments within the value chain and attract the right kind of investments and the transfer of technology along with it? So this is key, capacitating the agencies themselves. And second is the attracting the investments into the MSMEs, because MSMEs are the ones who make up the bulk of value chains. So this requires a different approach. You might need innovative financing, you need impact investors. These are small ticket investments. So look at both big and small ticket investments to drive sustainability. So this is one part. Trade. On trade, again, two aspects. There's the trade policy part of it, which is do you have climate-friendly, climate-smart trade policies and non-tariff measures as well? Do they incentivize bringing in imports of cleaner technologies, better products, and so on, all through the value chain? Similarly, on non-tariff measures, right? How stringent are they? How much do they incentivize maybe cheap polluting type of imports as opposed to stricter standards? Because when you're imposing those on imports, it will also help your exports because you'll be aligning with international standards. What we have found in Asia Pacific is actually there's a lot of scope to bring in more climate smart trade policies. You have only 6.2% of Asia Pacific's imports being covered by non-tariff measures which are climate smart. So there is scope on the trade policy side. A second part is how do you trade? So one is what you're trading, another is how you're trading, which is trade facilitation. And here there's a lot of scope for digitalizing trade procedures themselves and greening them. So how much can you do nationally? How much can you do across borders? So tremendous scope in trade digitalization with the advancement of technologies, with AI, blockchains, etc. So reducing paper-based transactions can have a big impact on reducing the carbon footprint. Third part, which is how do you face some of the growing measures related to the environment which impinge on trade, right? So the capacity building in the region that is needed to address, for instance, CBAM or deforestation initiative, etc. Trade negotiations, a lot of countries are graduating in this region, so therefore environmental measures and how to handle them. So this is another part of the trade policy angle. And last also within trade is transport, right? You also need green transport, and as we all know, transport is one of the key contributors to carbon emissions. So this is on the trade side. A third thing that I want to mention is the role of the private sector, which is sustainability reporting and tracking. Many countries are moving in this direction. You have mandatory as well as voluntary compliances. I think you need to get the MSMEs on board to do sustainability reporting and tracking. So these are some of the things. And just one point, which is look at good practices. ASEAN has the circular economy framework, guidelines, and they exactly touch upon many of the principles we've talked about, and I think the sub-region could really gain from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you very much. I think that was a, what you call it, circular economy. So we have just circled in with the policy issues at the end, and Rupa has rightly reminded us that the issue of regional value chain and how it is going to emerge if we don't take into account the investment policy. Then she reminded us about and within that, the role of the private sector was mentioned later, the issue of trade policy, and she did not forget to mention the non-tariff barriers in these cases, and then the role of digitalization, and the connectivity, transport, and finally, learning from others, particularly from Southeast Asia. No wonder coming from ESCAP. It is all that. Thank you very much. Colleagues, now give a big collective hand to all these fantastic 5 speakers who followed an extraordinary keynote speech. It was not a easy task to do that, and I think they have all risen to the occasion. Now, about the further time management. I think this is the most important part of green value chain, time management. That's what I think for today's evening. The issue is, at this moment, we started 15 minutes late, so the organizers push. We will stop 15 minutes later. So I want to give the floor for 15 minutes, and then I want to come back to the table and give them 3 or 4 minutes each to make their, the concluding or observations in that way. If that is okay with the organizers? Am I okay? Thank you. You're not taking away my dinner for being late? Okay, thank you. That's I wanted to ensure my dinner. That's the most important thing. So, colleagues, you have now heard possibly one of the most tricky subjects. Now it is on the table. That is, when we are seeing that the shared resources which were being used within a relatively, the historically received framework has decomposed or decoupled or disintegrated over the last couple of years more than before, and the height of the South Asian global integration as a region has receded a bit in the back. So here comes in an issue which is called global value chain, or the regional value chain, or the green value chain. We have first heard the value chain issue, then we heard in the literature about the global value chain issue, then it was the regional value chain issue, and now you have the green value chain issue, and that was not enough. It is the green regional value chain issue. So, how can you make more complex in that? On the other hand, we have also seen this green issue has also transpired into the other sectors. We have heard green finance, green technology, green products, green energy, all the greening of various kinds of things. Brown people like me have great difficulty in living in this upcoming green world. And then comes in the other issues. It is called just transition. It's not enough to say green transition. We have to add to that just transition. I never could distinguish between which one is bigger concept than the other in many ways. So we are dealing with with a subject which is in many ways conceptually evolving, and evidence are yet to be fitted in order to come to a conclusive situation. So when the last session of SAES was in Dhaka, and we were talking about reframing of South Asian cooperation agenda in the new regional context and the global, given the global dimensions, I never anticipated that our good friends from Swati would end up discussing, after 1 year, the reframing it through the global value chain in many ways. In between, it only shows that how the politics in the region has deteriorated, that we would have to think of a much more innocent subject to discuss that one. But I can tell you, with you all over here, even you will make that innocent subject look more exciting than they thought. Let's have a discussion. The floor is open. 1 minute each. Yes, sir. Please tell your name so that I know you as a friend, Muni, but others need to know too.
Thank you very much. My name is Shafqat Munir. I am from SDPI, Pakistan. I think the whole discussion, gives us another thinking in the WTO too. Because the value chain, all these things are existing. We already had WTO rule, but now we are greening it. Rather, we are greenwashing everything. So the negative side of greening is that it has an additional cost. The question here is, who will bear this cost? Because now there are not negotiation. There are CBAMs or IPRs existing, which are adding the cost of living, cost of production, cost of everything. And I would refer here the SDG 12. Where are our responsibilities?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munir. Colleagues, please keep note of all the comments which are being made, and so that you can respond to some of those if you want to. Sir, I also request you to take note of them if you want to respond to any of those in the future, in the coming month. Yes, miss.
Thank you. My name is Yuvika Bandari. I'm Secretary General of Nepal Association of Tour and Travel
Would you
Agents.
kindly take it closer?
Closer, okay. Thank you. Thank you for having us in this forum. I just wanted to say a few things about tourism. Nepalese tourism started with ecotourism and sustainable tourism, though we have not been able to continue it as we like it to be. And talking about green value chain, tourism is always in link with transportation, like said by one of our panelists, as well as agriculture, energy, and we depend upon bilateral relationship as well. And it greatly, the profitability and the working condition of tourism greatly affects, is greatly affected by the geopolitics as well. In context of Nepal, we usually say that, thank you for Ms. Rupa Chanda for mentioning MSMEs, because in Nepal we sometimes forget about the micro industry, and Nepal, the tourism and the travel fraternity is usually made up of the micro companies rather than the big corporate houses. And saying that, I was wondering, in Nepal we always have the, in tourism we always ask for better infrastructure to promote tourism. And the main concern is construction of airport as Nisgat. And many environmental people say that it is not the right way to go ahead. But we travel, yeah. So I was thinking, what kind of policy can be developed to get the balance between building an infrastructure in this present age, well as looking into the vulnerabilities of
Excellent
the
point.
communities.
So we got the ecotourism issue and also the geopolitics and also your eco-friendly transportation or connectivity issue. Yes, anybody from the back?
Thank you. My name is Aparna Sani.
Please bring it closer.
My name is Aparna Sani, and I'm from Jawaharlal Nehru University. This is a question, clarification that I would seek from Dr. Suleri, because you spoke in detail about the...
Please take the microphone closer.
Okay, this is for Dr. Suleri.
Yes, yes.
You had spoken in detail about the EU CBAM example and highlighted the role of certification and private-private partnership. So how do you see the role of these voluntary carbon markets in addressing the EU CBAM in particular, considering the EU is very clear that it wants its own methodology of carbon or emissions being embedded in the goods that are being imported? So
really getting technical. Yes. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Abid, please, for yours. You will come back. Yes, over there. And then over there, these two. I will take a couple of more, 2 or 3, and then we'll come. Yes.
Hi.
The light is on my face straight, so I don't see everybody. Please, the organizer should help me. Yes, please carry on.
Hi, Sanjay Bashis from Climate Action Network South Asia. I think we have been talking about green value chain for last many years, and here we are at the era when that is actually happening. My concern is, how do we ensure transformation? Because the way businesses happen, many of the monopolies will break. How do we engage them in the new setup? For example, now...
engage whom?
Engage private sector.
Okay.
The energy generation, electricity generation. We are looking at feed-in tariff. We are looking at energy to be generated from solar plants, decentralized solar plants. Or second, charging your electric vehicles at home rather than going to petrol pumps. So how do we ensure transformation that doesn't pinch them? They are part of the journey.
Okay. Thank you very much. Who else was there on the back? Yes, please.
This is Salim Rahan from Bangladesh. I have a question for Professor Raman Suman because, sir, you have actually talked about this issue in the past quite a lot. But in the context of this green value chain, in the past you talked about the very unfair distribution in the whole value chain in various products, especially when it comes to the ready-made garments industry in Bangladesh. But we have also seen that greening the industry, it involves a lot of cost, where we don't see that kind of burden sharing at the higher up in the value chain, especially from the buyers from the North American, European countries. So how do you really ensure that, when you talk about this green value chain, whether there will be a proper burden sharing? Thank you.
Thank you. That brings, again, this issue of global value chain, that you produce a T-shirt with $2 in Dhaka, and it ends up into $40 on the high street. So where does the value go? Okay, please carry on. So Professor One is going to respond to that. No. Yes, please. Introduce yourself, please. Please come closer.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Professor Murli from Center for WTO Studies, New Delhi. See, when you are talking about across-country discussions and debates on any sector, like green goods, firstly, we need to define the green goods, what we are talking about. So once we define it, then we can move forward. Looking at it, the global level, green good understanding is also the solar panels, which actually, if you look at the whole value chain of the production of solar chains, chips go into the process. And chips production is the most extraction in expansive process, so they're very dark brown or black, you can call it black product. So I just wanted to allude that.
Thank you very much. That would be also part of the whole certification issue. What exactly is the green goods? That issue will come up. You see, we were talking about South Asia, but there are countries which we have not participated as yet in our discussion. I have the name Madam Mariam Shakila from Maldives. Madam Shakila?
Yeah. I'm here. Thank you very much.
This is the floor, please.
My question is, one of the things that we have not addressed over here is the gap in training and skill building. There's a lot of resistance which translates into, for example, market demand because of the skepticism that is attached to that. Also, in production. These are two things that I would like to ask the panelists to address. The other question that I would like to ask is, a forum like this, also we should be talking about the solutions. So what are the things that we can do, for example, to address the supply chain complexity? What are the things that we can do to address the fragmented regulations that hinders us from moving forward? Thank you.
Fragmented regulatory framework and the supply chain challenges. What a peaceful crowd. Any more? If not, then I will go back to the panelists and I will give them 3 minutes each for them, both in terms of responding to some of the issues or the things they really want to reiterate or add in today's context. So let me start. Sir, I will come to you at the end. If you allow me, that would be the concluding sentences coming from you. Let me start with the reverse order now. The supply chain has reversed now. Rupa.
Okay. So let me take the first one, which is on the cost of greening, even though that was more of a comment. I think, yes, this is a major challenge, but technology and innovation are really the key. The problem there is the transfer of the technology and the IP related to it. But I'm still hopeful because there are a lot of interesting frugal innovations that are happening. There are startups and so on. So I think to some extent over time, costs will come down in certain areas. They won't be symmetric across different countries in this region, of course. Some are better placed. On the compliance costs, I think this is where governments have to play a bigger role in terms of regulations, because in many of these areas, we still don't even have the regulations in place. The question on green goods, I will just mention taxonomy is important. And when we talk of an agenda for regional cooperation, also having an agreed taxonomy, that's something you see in the ASEAN. They have actually come up with their own taxonomy in the case of circular economy. On, many of the products that we consider environment friendly, but if you take end to end, they are not. Same thing for digital economy also, from extraction all the way to the end of the e-waste. So therefore, again, I think all of these have to be really looked at in the net effect on the circular economy context, not just as green products per se. So that's a much more challenging thing that will elude consensus, I believe. Finally, I mean, on the question of engaging the private sector, I think that was an interesting question. It's, again, regulation which nudges private sector in a certain direction.
But Rupa, what do you mean by engaging the private sector? Apart from the policy incentives, how do you do that?
So one part of it is also, it depends upon the area. For instance, if you look at financing and the kind of infrastructure gaps that are there, this is where blended financing might play a very important role. So private sector engagement could be through capacity building, could be through coaching, could be through, you know, just regulatory incentives. So it really depends upon what thing you're doing, right? But without the private sector, none
and
of the
there
stuff
again,
on
the micro and small and medium issue will come up, I guess.
yes, that requires a different approach again, especially on the financing side and capacity building.
Thank you very much. Let me move to Abid.
Well, thank you. Shafkat, your question on greenwashing and who will pay the cost. You see, from childhood till the old ages, we keep on saying and listening, it's not fair. And the word is not fair. We need to accept it. Greenwashing would always be there, or no matter whatever terminology we come up with, its misuse will always come up.
Abid, is it the word not fair or the life itself is not fair?
The life is not fair.
Please.
This ended. That's why the whole emphasis was on climate finance in COP29. So when we are talking of funds for mitigation, essentially we are talking of new technologies that would reduce the emission, and many of those technologies are required for greening our value chains. When we are talking of adaptation fund, we are talking of how to cope with and how to live with the existing climate change realities and funds for it. And that is another way of using natural resources. So many of the funds that are required for greening the value chain should come from this, but they will not. They will not, and it doesn't mean we should stop there. We need to keep on preparing ourselves domestically in order to face the external and internal challenges that require major transformation in our supply chain. And finally, on this carbon markets and carbon credits, although in COP29, Article 6.4 and the rules, those are there now, you can transfer your credits internationally. But the challenge remains, and it is about transparency, it's about additionality factor, and it is about their permanence. So I would say that carbon markets, carbon credits, while they are there, but the definitional issues, the challenges, those would be there. And again, it's not fair to keep on trading those carbon credits while we don't have an internationally accepted definition on quality or the price of those credits. But this is how the market is, and this is how it would go until...
But just 15 seconds to respond on that. Yes, no, very good. This standards at the end of the day, or what is what in many things, and what is acceptable and what is not, even residues and other things. Who decides? Is it the scientific community which decides? Well, or it is the global power which decides? Or it is the corporate interest which decides? What is your take on that?
All. And if we look at...
in that order?
If we look at COPs...
No, order them.
If we look at COPs or WTO, we know that while in climate change, science is important, but geopolitics is equally important. And at times, geopolitics define and it prevails.
Not the corporate structure.
But then who is the major donor of Donald Trump?
I leave this discussion for your dinner table. Please, Ganesh.
Thank you. My first point is really about this decoupling shock, which I really don't think we've discussed very much, and I think it's really going to come.
No, Ganesh, may I just intervene a bit? Please. I say your first point was very interesting. Trump 2 and Premier Modi, and the possibilities for India in this current. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. So you're seeing in the data On the import side, India is now a major importer of intermediate goods, right? It's the 6th in the world, according to the latest WTO statistics I have seen.
Could you take it closer?
Yeah, it's the 6th in the world on the import of intermediate goods globally in the last quarter, but it's not much in the export side. Yeah? So the estimate is about 1.5% of world intermediate goods exports from India. I think that could double in the next 5 years. And you're seeing this through micro evidence, right? You've got Mercedes.
Now, President Trump's new policies, how they are going to affect that one?
So India, so one hopes...
This will also relate to what Professor Subhan mentioned, weaponizing trade policies.
Sure. So one hopes that he doesn't discover India in the way that he's discovered China, right? So that's the first point, right? Because, you know, US has a large trade deficit with India, right? And the threat is 60% tariffs on China, 10% on everybody else.
You really believe there will be a 60%?
Well, it's out of the deal. I think we have to go. Look, I think we have to go back to how Trump Mark I was done and the whole bunch of it. So just very briefly on that story, I think there's an opportunity and a threat for South Asia, right? In the short term, I think the opportunity is there. As China gets hit, more of this stuff will move. It'll move to Southeast Asia and East Asia. This is my guess. Vietnam, Indonesia particularly, and a bit of Thailand. India will get, can the rest of us join? Yeah? And I think to do that, and my second point is directly related to that, I think it's got to really be a business-led story, and it's led by the large corporates in our countries. I am a little skeptical about the MSME, because, you know, they just don't have the price, quality, delivery, and we can talk about that. But the M, that is the tier 2 supplier, I think is an important part of the chain, right? So we really have to break it down. The last point I want
But the tier 2 are dominated by the SMEs in many countries.
The M. And by medium, I'm talking about firms up to about 100 employees.
Okay.
So it's so I mean, we can talk in more detail on the technical, right? And then I think it really, government really has to look very hard in our country. You know, we try to do too much on public policy with government. And in my own country, Sri Lanka, one has seen the greatest government failure in the last period. And so I think we just need to have very simple things first, with strategizing, to try to get the best out of this new opportunity. Sorry, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Banerjee, your take? Before I poke you into certain issues. Yes, please.
Sure. So, you know, quickly, I think...
Would you take it closer?
I think I'll just quickly take the first question on costs and what Professor Sahni also mentioned. And this is our concern. That you have these labor-facing sectors, which are textiles, food processing, etc., which are also hit by a lot of private standards. So consumer activism in these markets and environmental related private standards, and the cost of compliance is high, which prices out a lot of the MSMEs, especially the M's, the micros. The second is the trajectory of the value chain globally, and it goes back to the IPR issue, right? So this is, you know, we have a situation, and Professor Swani mentioned, that even, let's say, given the differences in carbon markets and carbon price of carbon, you might have a firm in developing world which mitigates exactly the same amount of carbon as a European firm does. But it'll still have to pay that border tax. Not because it's less environmentally efficient, but because the price of carbon in Europe is priced higher. The money that comes from that tax goes to Europe to fund IPR development in Europe, which again leads to product development which stays in Europe, and you are buying that product because you need to become part of the green transition.
Since you run WTO Study Center, you're fully aware the state of negotiation of environmental supportive services in negotiations in the WTO, where it stands at this moment, given all the situation within the WTO stalemate happening. And with Mr. Trump coming in, and the dispute settlement mechanism not working. So do you see WTO, since you lead the WTO studies, do you see a role for WTO for the environmental goods and services negotiation?
Well, not in, I don't think there's going to be much of the environmental goods and services per se. There are parts of it in terms of plastic, you know, initiatives in plastic pollution, etc. But there are also issues of unilateral measures like the CBAM, like the EU deforestation, which could be potentially debated. But just to close on that point, is that you will have this issue where you have the global south buying expensive technology-intensive products for their so-called green and just transition.
No, I'm again coming back to that, because all the global value chain issues, other regional these value chain issues. At the end of the day, it is also about the standards and also the issue of capacity and regulations and other things. So what do you see in the immediate future as the rules and rule setter in the world?
I don't think it's so much about standards in this case. It's about unilateral. So first of all, let's perish the thought that there is going to be any global standards. And I think
you really believe in unilateral liberalization?
No, not unilateral liberalization. It's unilateral rule making. So if I'm a large market like European Union, because
so that is what I'm asking, whether the European Union may come as a proxy under the circumstances.
Well, the proxy for what? Not proxy for global rule making.
Rule setting.
Well, not proxy for global rule setting, definitely, but proxy for setting the rules of the game by which, by the virtue of their market size, you force others to comply. And and that's where the challenge lies.
That is the logic of plurilateral.
But plurilateral is something completely different. We don't have time to debate that. But the larger point is essentially this: that you have a divergence here, where the firms that will dominate the value chain for the goods that you need for a just transition lie largely in the north, while they extract money from the south based on the unilateral measures, further fight for funding that divergence, and that's the challenge we have to face.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what we are seeing is that the issue of rule making will be a critical one. And now that the multilateral system is in a state of dysfunctionality with Mr. Trump out there, if really US goes out of the WTO and also the dispute settlement mechanism, they have not given a judge for a long time now. So whether the vortex of the rulemaking will shift more towards the bigger integrated market as European Union as it stands, or at the same time whether China and Southeast Asia and others will operate more as a counterweight or not, that is to be seen. So this will be one major area in the upcoming days, both the rules making and the standards, how we look at it in many ways. Thank you. I think that was another great, I don't know whether in other sessions these issues will come up or not, will be discussed. Brother, you are the last speaker now.
Thank you, Dr. Dev. Well, Dr. Dev has used many terms: global value chain, regional value chain, green value chain. But I put forward some of the issues from the perspective of regional green value chain. And here from the floor, one issue was raised particularly on greenwashing. From regional perspective, I don't see any existing mechanism to address that greenwashing in regional, regional value chain.
Greenwashing word you are using as an abusive word, or it is an appreciative word?
It's abusive word.
Abusive word for you. Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify. Please carry on.
Okay. And for this, we might need some sort of mechanism at the regional level for traceability and transparency. It's particularly, it would help to track hazardous products and materials, and also allocated responsibilities, and also, it monitors environmental compliance, that too in transparent way. And that may address, and another mechanisms could be, that might turn out to be, controversial, but we need to have some sort of sustainability provisions in our regional trade agreement. It could be used as protectionist measure, but still, but I'm in favor of that provisions, and so that we can implement not through coercions but through cooperations. That could be the possibility. Okay. So one is that issue, and another I just want to highlight. One of the issue was that's the distributions of this. Distribution of benefits of this value chain.
Distribution of benefit sharing.
Yeah. Well, it was just, out of, I was just thinking about, okay, we are having, regional green value chains, and if you look at the economic structure and level of development in South Asian countries, then This value chain model would be a spider-like structure rather than snake-like structure. Hub and spike models, where India would be hub and the rest of the countries would be spikes. In that situation, again, looking at the, carbon
India
emission.
is
Carbon
the
emission.
center and the others are the hubs. And under the current geopolitical, geostrategic situation, you are still excited about it.
In terms of economic development and productive capacity, I think
so. Do you think that the politics and the economics may be decoupled and can develop side by side?
Well, yes. You can have. Look
Shall
at
I
the
put this
look at the economic.
Onto the colleagues, if I can put this on the vote today.
Wait, Dev.
No, brother, just hold on.
If you look at the economic trade relations between China and India, okay, you can infer. These two can be decoupled, and I assume. This politics.
I am putting it to you today, as the last question for the House, that given we all know that since the last SAES meeting took place in Dhaka, the regional issues, the regional politics has not improved, if not deteriorated, at the bilateral level. So what Dr. Poshraj Pandey, as an eternalist optimist, is telling us that still the economy can grow and cooperation may happen, notwithstanding the political cloud overcast what we have. And he refers to India-China relationship. He could have also referred to US-China relationship. So my question to the House is that, do you think in the next 5 years, notwithstanding the political cloud overshadowing us, we can still pursue our regional cooperation, not wishful thinking, realization. Those who think that we can still pursue, our economic cooperation will proceed, notwithstanding the challenges in politics, please raise your hand. I think the number of optimists has reduced significantly in South Asia. I can... All panelists, because they have been asked to do that. I don't see even 20% raised hand in favor of being optimist in that way. I think that really brings us to the challenge of hosting this SAES 15, that we are dealing with such circumstances which do not make us feel so optimistic about the cooperation or the sharing of the resources and maximizing the efforts to improve the conditions of our citizens, and particularly those who are left behind. So, but at the same time, which essentially means the challenge for these intellectuals, the thinking people, the policy guidance, the challenges are much more higher for them in those cases in that way. So I think if you allow me to, I would conclude that if the situation is more challenging, that we will have to pull up our belt and work much more harder in the coming days in many ways. And that is the word from Professor One, keep the spirit alive. I think the spirit is in favor of the citizens of our countries. So I will cede my position and give the concluding words to Professor Remansovan for the evening. Thank you, colleagues. That was a pleasure being with you. And give a big hand to my panelists and to the organizers for doing a fantastic SAES 15 and inviting us over there. And I'm really, really looking forward to interactions with all of you. So the floor is yours for the concluding words.
Thank you, Deb, for conceding the last word. One quick remark. What no one pointed out over here was that one of the major green value chains, which have already been developed for South Asia, is the fact that virtually every country has been importing all its solar panels from China. And this seems to be the trend, whereas we would have had some expectations that India would have been able to sort of develop its own solar panel industry and use this as an instrument of trade. In fact, actually, the further deepening of the value chain with China is that Bangladesh, at least when the Chinese delegation came here and met Professor Yunus, he asked them to come and invest in setting up solar panel enterprises in Bangladesh so that there would be a further deepening of the value chain. And I imagine that this has emerged in other countries. As far as I know, in Nepal, the EVs, which have been so successfully serving the transport sector, are also based on imports from China. So that it's a purely market-driven process now. Part of this green value chain is emanating from outside South Asia. Of course, it isn't just emanating in South Asia from China, it is also intruding into Europe and North America. And the response there is not that we are now in a position to green our respective economies by importing cheap EVs from China. They are now putting up protectionist barriers against that, and in the false hope that they will then be able to fabricate a domestic industry which will produce more expensive solar panels, thereby sort of throwing mud in the face of the globalized world which they themselves set out to set up. The next issue I wish to point out is that we have to rethink the whole notion of green as also a potential NTB, a non-trade barrier, which has been part of the weaponization process of Western countries in the United States, whose competitive positions have been eroding in a whole range of areas, and for whom then green became another mechanism to try to sort of retain a bit of space for themselves. They are now no longer needing to play that sort of game with Mr. Trump on the who's come round, who thinks that he can go back and recreate a 19th century world of import substitution in the United States to rebuild the American economy. I mean, it's part of the fantasy world which he occupies and has done for most of his life. But this again is a problem which you want to talk about over here, because the whole notion that here we are talking about some sort of rule-based world in which issues of greening and so forth are coming up, whereas what you are having is a completely sort of anarchy in the rule-based world, where particular countries blackmail you by using the size of their market to in fact actually exercise leverage which they cannot have through the normal competitive process. So these are the objective realities you can live in. My friend Salim Rehan raised, of course, the issue then of the accessing of those markets. And all of us, for example, in Bangladesh have had to go through an intensive greening process. In fact, we claim to have the largest number of green ready-made garment factories in the world, not to mention labor standards. But does this buy us any competitive advantage in the European and US market? It does not. We are still paying 15% duties on accessing the US market with our RMGs. And the question then is that all the squeeze eventually comes back actually not even on the sort of owners and entrepreneurs of garment factories, but on the workers, who then have become the victims of this particular process. So where does South Asia come in? Well, one of the fantasies which I have, because that's all it can actually be, is that all the South Asian exporters of ready-made garment, and perhaps here, if you can draw in all the Asian exporters of ready-made garments, can come together and ask for a redefinition of how the value added is shared from their exports, and to then threaten to set up their own multinational trading companies with huge warehouses in the United States and across Europe, so that they then control the value chain and they then determine the terms on which value added is shared, rather than the big marketing companies abroad. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a new agenda for you for the next 2 days. Thank you very much. Have a very good evening.